There's a side of Juneteenth that most people never hear about. Yes, they tell us about the parades, the cookouts, the red drinks, the music, the delayed freedom finally reaching Texas, and that's the version that feels safe. But behind that, behind the smiling photos and the holiday sales, there was something else happening, something spiritual. Because for the enslaved, freedom wasn't just a matter of waiting on soldiers to arrive. It wasn't just hoping that a document would magically reach the right hands and free them. It was a spiritual warfare for them, fought in whispers, in secret rooms, in fields at night, in the corners of cabins where herbs were crushed, candles were lit, and prayers were whispered under their breath. It was hoodoo. It was root work. It was calling on ancestors whose names had been stolen, but whose power remained alive. While the world waited for freedom to come by law, our ancestors were working for it spiritually, fighting back in ways the oppressor couldn't see but felt. And today, we're going to talk about that side of Juneteenth, the side they didn't teach in school, the side where hoodoo became resistance. Hey y'all, I'm Yaya. Happy Juneteenth. And today we're going to take Juneteenth beyond the surface, not just the history, but the spiritual undercurrent that still runs deep even today. Because our people didn't just wait for freedom, they worked for it physically and spiritually. And even today, a lot of things we do is hoodoo in disguise. So here's a quick refresher on Juneteenth. So really quick for anyone who might not fully know the backstory, why is it a holiday? The Emancipation Proclamation was signed by Abraham Lincoln in 1863, technically freeing enslaved people in Confederate states. But the problem was not everybody wanted to honor that. It took until June 19th, 1865, a full 2.5 years later, for Union soldiers to finally roll up until Galveston, Texas, and enforce that freedom. That's where Juneteenth comes from. June 19th. So June 19th, 1865 marks the day when enslaved people in Galveston, Texas finally learned that slavery had ended 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. So during slavery, Black people carried spiritual traditions that were often disguised for survival. Hoodoo, also called root work or conjure, became a way for many people to protect themselves, seek justice, and call on ancestors for strength. Now, in secret, rituals were performed to protect families, resist oppression, and spiritually bind those who meant them harm. Hoodoo was never just about spells, it was about survival, it was about resistance, it was reclaiming power in a system designed to strip their power away. Even after emancipation, hoodoo continued as a quiet form of spiritual protection, because I'm sure we all know once slavery ended, it wasn't all peaches and cream. You still have Black communities, even to this day, vulnerable to violence, economic oppression, systematic racism, and this is where hoodoo gave those individuals a spiritual weapon when the physical options were limited. So when we celebrate Juneteenth, yes, we're celebrating freedom, but for many of us, we're also honoring the ancestors who not only fought physically, but spiritually for that exact freedom. And hoodoo played a major role in that fight. Now think about it. If you were in Texas in 1865, you might have heard rumors that slavery had ended elsewhere, but you were still trapped. And that's the exact kind of mental, emotional, and spiritual pressure that can break a person. But instead, a lot of our ancestors leaned on spiritual practice that gave them the power where the law wouldn't. They might have whispered prayers at night. They might have carried roots and herbs sewn into their clothing for protection. They might have anointed their children with oils to keep them safe. In some cases, there are stories where enslaved people performed entire rituals calling on the ancestors and spirits to bring about their freedom. And we know from oral traditions passed down that very specific rituals were common for protection, just a few. Carrying High John the Conqueror root, which is a powerful symbol of strength, luck, and overcoming obstacles. Enslaved men would often tuck a small piece inside their clothing when facing dangerous situations. And of course, making mojo bags, which is basically a small pouch filled with with herbs and protective amulets, along with personal items like that individual's hair or nail clippings. These bags were hidden in garments sewn into hems or worn around the neck. Also, cleansing rituals where you literally clean, the sweeping method, which is sweeping the doorway each morning with brooms made of specific branches to spiritually clear away evil or danger coming into the home or quarters. There is salt and brick dust, spreading a sprinkle of red brick dust at doorways and thresholds to block spiritual harm or evil intention from entering to their spaces. And of course, the book of Psalms in the Bible, reciting specific scriptures like Psalms 23 or Psalms 91, while anointing children with oil to call divine protection. And then you have nailing up iron objects like horseshoes, railroad spikes, or nails hammered into door frames to nail down safety and ward off evil energy. And these weren't just rituals for show, they were quite acts of resistance. They were ways of saying, you may have my body, but you won't have my spirit. And there's even oral history, especially in parts of the South, of people who claim certain workings help delay patrols, confuse overseers, or protect families from being separated. Now, whether you believe in every story literally or see it as symbolism, what matters is that hoodoo gave people a sense of control in a world designed to strip them of everything. And of course, in the mix of all of this, there are hoodoo figures who played a major role. Some of these spiritual leaders during slavery and after became legendary for how they used hoodoo as a part of their resistance. First, we have Denmark Vesey, and we talked about him before, who was a freed man. He was able to get free because he won the lotto and he purchased his freedom. And he tried to plot one of the largest slave rebellions in U.S. history in Charleston, South Carolina. Many believe his uprising was spiritually supported with rituals designed to give courage and protection, but we know that rebellion did not take place because there were enslaved individuals that decided to tell on him. And then we have Denmark Vesey's right-hand man, who was Gullah Jack. Originally from Angola, Jack was known to work powerful African root magic, handing out conjure bags and charms to the rebels for protection, spiritual strength, and secrecy. And then we have Aunt Caroline, who I did a video on, who is a famous root worker and hoodoo woman from Arkansas in the late 1800s. Now, people came from all over seeking her form of protection and guidance and spiritual work. Long after slavery ended, she became so respected that even some white people came to her for work as well, quietly, or they would go to her for readings. So those are just a few of the top dogs. There are several individuals who made a name for themselves during this time, but those are the most familiar ones. And many think of hoodoo as like a far off or just aged out practice, but a lot of things we do today is from hoodoo. Juneteenth still carries spiritual meaning from those hoodoo roots, even if people don't always realize it. For example, take the red drinks that I mentioned before, the strawberry sodas, the hibiscus tea, the red punch, the way we refer to the flavor cherry as red. I want the red Gatorade, give me the red soda. Drinking out of red cups at cookouts. The red color symbolizes the bloodshed during slavery, but also ties directly back to West African traditions where red represented life, still represents life, spiritual energy, protection, and vitality. Serving red drinks isn't just a celebration, it's an ancestral offering, a quiet nod to the sacrifices that were made for our survival. In many rituals, these individuals would purposely offer drinks in red cups or drinks that were flavored to depict the color red, to symbolize both an offering to that spirit, but the color red also as an offering of blood as well. So if you weren't using like your actual blood, you will offer a red drink to that spirit or to whatever ritual that you're doing. And it's similar to Christian practices on communion, how you drink the cranberry juice to symbolize the blood of Jesus. That same thing was used in African practices and in hoodoo. Also, when it comes to celebrations, think about how we gather under big trees for cookouts and reunions. In many African traditions, the tree represents the meeting place between the living and the ancestors. Sitting under the shade of a large oak tree or pecan tree, that's ancestral work, whether people realize it or not. And you will probably hear some people say they want their ashes sprinkled around a tree because the tree symbolizes the line between life and the afterlife and the meeting place where you could communicate with spirits. And I've seen this when I went to New Orleans at Congo Square. There's this big tree there that has a bunch of fruit and different offerings circled around it to symbolize a meeting place to communicate with your ancestors. And just how I told you before, at crossroads you may see offerings that people left in trees trees as well. If you take a walk through a trail or just in nature in general, if you see bottles of liquor, any type of jewelry, flowers, fruit, that's an offering giving to an ancestor by a tree, because that's the place where usually people can connect to them, the tree or the ocean. And even the music and drum circles sometimes done during Juneteenth festivals echo back to drumming traditions that were once banned during slavery. And there are stories that are shared that these drumming circles were banned because it made the slave owners feel uncomfortable. They said, oh, I don't like the way I feel when I hear the drums. And this goes back to modern day, how you have some white people who are uncomfortable with loud music, like it's disturbing. So going over the whole Juneteenth celebration, we did the music, we did meeting at the tree, we did the red drinks, okay, the food, collard greens, black-eyed peas, yams, all carry spiritual associations. Of course, we refer to it as soul food. And of course, today we refer to it as, oh, we're going to grandma's house to eat. We about to fire up the grill, and we get excited about it. But this was held with such honor back in the day, because not only were you about to feed yourself, you were about to give offerings to the spirits and your ancestors as well. That's why usually it was so much food, because you're feeding yourself, you're feeding the spirits, you're feeding the ancestors, all of that stuff. Everybody about to eat. So when we honor ancestors during these gatherings, pour libations, you know, when you're out drinking with friends and they say, oh, pour some out for the homies, that's an offering to spirit. All of that is pure root work. Or how I mentioned before, if you go to your aunt's house and her husband passed away and she leaves the room exactly how it is, she doesn't want to touch anything, she has his watch by his picture and she lights a candle by it, that's an ancestor altar. That's just not a cute little table in the living room. That's an altar. But of course, some people don't want to refer to it as that because it's like, oh, that's demonic. And it's like, no, that's what you're doing. But those are the small elements of hoodoo that are still alive because people practice it without even knowing it. And this is something I'm sure we won't forget. Even after slavery ended, Black people were and still are in danger. Lynchings, Jim Crow, sundown towns, police violence, the Klan. Physical freedom came on paper, but spiritual protection was still necessary. Hoodoo continued to thrive quietly in Black communities, even being practiced in some churches. People still keeping it to themselves, which goes to today where people are so secretive about what they practice, because it's almost like inner trauma from slavery where you were just told not to tell anybody, so people still keep it to themselves. People continue to do work for protection, for justice, for prosperity. And even though Christianity was publicly pushed, many Black churches quietly blended hoodoo into daily life. Some of y'all grew up with grandmothers or grandfathers who prayed over you, but also slipped a little oil in your shoes or on your forehead, swept the house in a certain way, or told you not to let nobody sweep over your feet. So when we celebrate Juneteenth, yes, we celebrate freedom, but we also honor a spiritual resilience that doesn't always get talked about because it's kept secret. Because freedom wasn't just handed to our people, they fought for it physically and spiritually every way they knew how to. And again, even now, many of us continue those traditions without realizing it. We light a candle for protection, speak affirmations, call on our ancestors, use herbs for healing. So for me, it's just a reminder that we've always found power in some type of way. Even when the world was trying to make us powerless, we tapped into our spiritual power that we should still tap into today, because we're going through the same struggle, just a little bit different. So we still need the strength of our ancestors, the rituals of hoodoo, and just the knowledge of things that are beyond the physical for all around protection and prosperity. But thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. And again, happy Juneteenth. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know some things that your family practice where they may not realize it's hoodoo, but now you know it's hoodoo, or little small teachings that you now carry with you from the elders in your family. Let's have a conversation down below. But like I always say, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. Until next time, you guys, Ashe, baby.